Hello, everyone. I am the Sleeper Man, and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel also. Where are you from? And what time are you watching now? Get comfortable and relax. Can you imagine being alone in a gym and witnessing a swing moving by itself while kids talk about a ghostly presence? This video will reveal the spine-chilling details of our night in the gym, including the creepy security footage that shows an empty swing swinging back and forth. Don't miss out on discovering why this seemingly innocent playground became a scene of paranormal intrigue. I remember walking into the gym that day, the usual buzz of kids' laughter and gymnastic chatter filling the air. The place was huge, with massive windows letting in plenty of daylight, making it bright and welcoming. It was a typical day at work until I noticed something odd. A girl I worked with, who usually had a bright smile, looked visibly shaken. When I asked her what was wrong, she told me about a strange incident in our gymnastics class. One of the kids had been staring up at the ceiling, and when she asked him what he was looking at, he simply said, "There's a little boy up there." Naturally, she brushed it off as an overactive imagination, but it unnerved her. Later, two more coworkers came out of the gym, looking just as unsettled. Apparently, a pair of 5-year-old twins had gone down the slide, and then just stared at the ceiling, as if something had captivated their attention. They described it with a kind of eerie certainty that made everyone's skin crawl a little. As the day wore on, I was working a party in the gym. I was pushing the little boy on the giant swing we had, trying to give him a good time. He started to stare up at the ceiling just like the kids earlier. Without warning, he said directly to my face, "Hey, there's a little boy up there." It sent a chill down my spine. Was it just coincidence? Or was there something more to these encounters? We all decided it was time to report these strange occurrences to our manager. The next day, during our downtime, our manager reviewed the security footage from the gym. He called us in to look at the live stream of the cameras. To our surprise, the footage showed the giant swing moving back and forth. But there was no one in the gym. The room was tense as we all huddled around the monitor. The gym, usually so full of life, now seemed like an empty, ghostly space. The swing, with its bright red seat and thick ropes, moved slowly in the video, back and forth, as if someone was playing on it. The empty space around it was jarringly quiet, save for the occasional creak of the swing's ropes. My manager rewound the footage, and we watched again. The swing moved with a smooth, rhythmic motion, but no one was there to push it. I could see my breath coming out in small, nervous puffs. Each of us took turns scrutinizing the screen, hoping to catch a glimpse of something that might explain the bizarre events, but there was nothing out of the ordinary. We tried to rationalize it. Could it be a draft or some sort of mechanical malfunction? We discussed various explanations, but nothing seemed to fit. It was unsettling to think that a child's imagination was somehow aligning with what we were seeing on the screen. The footage made it clear. The swing was moving on its own, yet no one was in sight. As we watched, my thoughts went back to the little boy who had talked about seeing a ghost. The notion seemed more real now, with the security footage as evidence. What if there was a little ghost boy who wanted to play? The thought was both chilling and oddly comforting. If this spirit was indeed a child who just wanted to have fun, maybe it wasn't so sinister after all. We all agreed to keep an eye on the gym just in case. The next party was approaching, and we hoped that whatever was causing the swings to move would either reveal itself or disappear altogether. The gym's usual bustle resumed, but an eerie undertone remained. The party had wrapped up, and the gym was once again empty. I stayed behind to clean up. The rhythmic hum of the overhead lights and the soft patter of rain against the windows creating a strangely serene atmosphere. The gym, usually so full of noise and movement, felt different in the quiet. It was almost as if the emptiness had its own weight, pressing down on the room. While I was sweeping up, I heard the faintest sound, a soft creaking, like the swing moving back and forth. I froze, glancing around the gym. The space was darkening with the evening, shadows stretching across the floor as the rain intensified. The noise came again, a gentle, almost imperceptible swing. My heart skipped a beat. I was alone in the gym, and the idea that the swing might start moving on its own made me uneasy. I approached the swing cautiously, my footsteps echoing in the stillness. The swing was still, but the ropes were damp, as though they had been recently used. My breath came out in small clouds mingling with the cool air. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, though I knew it was just my imagination. I sat on the swing hoping to provoke some kind of response. As I began to slowly rock back and forth, I looked up at the ceiling, half expecting to see a small figure peering down at me. The room was quiet except for the sound of the rain and the occasional creak of the swing, despite my rational mind trying to dismiss it as nothing more than a figment of my imagination. I couldn't ignore the unsettling feeling that lingered. Just then, I heard a sound that made me jump, a soft giggle, like a child's laughter. It was faint but unmistakable. I turned around quickly, but the gym was still empty. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. Maybe it was the sound of rain playing tricks on my ears. Still, the experience left me feeling on edge. The night dragged on, and I was about ready to finish up and head home when the gym's door creaked open. I glanced up, expecting to see one of my coworkers, but the doorway remained empty. My unease grew as the rain pounded harder against the windows, creating a relentless, drumming sound. The gym seemed to grow colder, the chill sinking into my bones. I decided to check the swing one last time before leaving. As I approached it, I noticed something strange. The swing's movement had changed. It wasn't the gentle sway from before. It was now moving with a deliberate rhythm, as if someone was trying to make it swing in a particular way. The sight of it sent a shiver down my spine. I hesitated for a moment, then moved closer to the swing. My flashlight flickered, casting eerie shadows across the gym. The swing slowed to a stop as I reached out to touch it, the cold ropes sending a chill through my fingertips. I stood there for a few moments, trying to make sense of the situation. The security footage had shown the swing moving on its own, but now, it seemed like the swing was waiting for something or someone. Then, as if to answer my unspoken question, a loud crash echoed through the gym. I spun around, heart racing, but saw nothing out of place. The sound had come from the direction of the gym's storage closet. With a deep breath, I made my way over, my footsteps muffled by the thick carpet of the gym. Inside the closet, I found nothing but a few stray gym mats and equipment. However, lying on the floor was a small toy, a tiny, worn-out truck. I recognized it immediately. It was the same toy that had been in the gym earlier, a toy one of the kids had played with. The realization hit me. Maybe the little boy's spirit had been trying to communicate or play with us through this toy. As I left the gym, I couldn't shake the feeling that the ghost boy had found his moment to have some fun. The swing, the giggles, the toy, everything seemed to point to a playful spirit who simply wanted to be noticed. I felt a mix of relief and unease as I locked up and headed home, the rain still falling steadily outside. The events of that night would stay with me, a true story of strange occurrences in the gym, leaving a lingering sense of curiosity about the little ghost boy and his quiet, elusive presence. Did you know that feeling an unexplained touch in the middle of the night could be more than just a dream? I'm sharing my terrifying experience of a cold grip that mimicked my sister's unsettling encounter. Find out why this story might make you rethink the strange things you've felt in your own home. Stay tuned for a jaw-dropping revelation. I was sitting in my room, chatting with my mom about the usual teenage stuff, school, friends, and all that. It was a rainy evening, and the sound of the rain hitting the window was oddly soothing. We had settled into one of those easy conversations where the minutes slipped by unnoticed, and the warmth of the room made everything feel comfortable and safe. Mid-sentence, I suddenly felt a firm grip on my arm. It was as if someone had reached out and grabbed me, but the touch was cold and unsettling. I looked over quickly, expecting to see my mom or maybe even my sister playing a trick on me. But no one was there. My mom was still talking, her gaze fixed on me with a look of mild confusion. "Are you all right?" she asked, her voice laced with concern. I glanced around the room, half expecting someone to pop out from behind the door or from under the bed, but everything seemed normal. I even checked the door, thinking maybe someone had slipped in unnoticed, but it was locked. My mom didn't see anything out of the ordinary, and when I tried to explain, I could tell she thought it was just my imagination playing tricks. A few weeks earlier, my sister had mentioned experiencing something similar, She was alone in her room when she felt an unexplained hand grip her arm. At the time, we all laughed it off as coincidence or a vivid dream. But here I was, experiencing the same eerie sensation. It was hard to shake the feeling that something strange was going on, even if I couldn't quite put my finger on it. The incident left me feeling unsettled, but I tried to brush it off as just a momentary lapse in reality. The rain continued its steady drumbeat against the window, adding to the atmosphere of creeping unease. I couldn't stop thinking about how my sister had felt the same chill, the same grip, only weeks before. That night, as I lay in bed, the house seemed quieter than usual. The rain had slowed to a mere drizzle, and the silence felt almost oppressive. I rolled over, trying to get comfortable, but my mind was racing. I couldn't shake the feeling of those cold fingers wrapping around my arm. It wasn't a dream. It felt too real, too vivid. Around midnight, I heard a faint rustling sound from the hallway. My heart skipped a beat, and I tensed up, straining to listen. The house was old, and creaks and groans were common, but this sound was different. It was softer, almost like a whisper moving through the air. I held my breath, trying to discern if it was just the wind or something more. I decided to investigate, despite my nerves. I got up and walked slowly to the door, every creak of the floorboards amplifying the tension. I peeked out into the hallway, but it was empty. The only light came from the dim glow of the street lamp filtering through the curtains. I checked each room, finding nothing out of place, yet the sense of being watched lingered. Returning to my room, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. I lay back in bed, trying to convince myself it was just my imagination. But as I closed my eyes, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Even though I was sure no one else was in the house, the grip I had felt seemed to echo through the quiet night. The next morning, the unsettling events of the night before felt like a distant memory. The sun was shining, and the rain had stopped, leaving the world outside bright and clear. I tried to focus on the day's routine, but the lingering sense of unease wouldn't let go. During breakfast, I mentioned the previous night's experience to my mom. She listened, her expression serious but not dismissive. "You know, your sister felt something similar a few weeks ago," she said, her voice thoughtful. "Maybe it's just a coincidence, or maybe the house has some weird drafts or something." She tried to reassure me, but her words did little to comfort me. Later in the day, while cleaning up my room, I noticed a strange sensation. It was as if someone was standing just outside the doorway, waiting. Every time I turned to check, there was nothing there. The feeling was persistent, almost palpable, but it was always just out of sight. It made me jump at every sound and shadow, which only heightened my anxiety. By evening, the house was quiet again. The rain had started up once more, and the rhythmic tapping on the windows seemed to match the steady thumping of my heart. I decided to try to sleep early, hoping that a good night's rest might clear my mind. As I settled under the covers, I couldn't help but feel a sense of foreboding, as if something was about to happen. Just as I was drifting off, a cold draft blew across my face, making me shiver. I sat up, heart pounding, and scanned the room. The window was closed, and the door was locked. There was no logical explanation for the chill, but it was enough to make me pull the blankets tighter around me. I forced myself to close my eyes, desperately hoping for a peaceful night. I woke up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, my heart racing. The cold draft from earlier had turned into a full-blown chill that seemed to seep into my bones. The room was dark, save for the faint glow from the street lamp outside, casting eerie shadows on the walls. I lay still, trying to steady my breathing and make sense of what I was feeling. Just then I felt it again, a cold, invisible hand gripping my arm. The sensation was exactly as I had experienced before, and it was as if the night was mocking my fears. I shot up in bed, scanning the room frantically. My mom and sister were asleep in their rooms, miles away from my immediate concern. The house was silent except for the persistent sound of rain against the windows. Summoning my courage, I grabbed a flashlight from my bedside table and slowly walked around the room. The beam of light cut through the darkness, revealing nothing out of place. I checked the closet, under the bed, and even the small, unused spaces in my room. Nothing seemed amiss, yet the grip on my arm had felt all too real. I returned to bed, my flashlight on the nightstand, and the rain outside continuing its soothing rhythm. I tried to convince myself that it was all in my head, a product of stress or overactive imagination. I repeated to myself that it was just a sensation, not an actual presence. Despite my best efforts, sleep eluded me as the fear clung to my mind. As dawn broke and the first light of morning filtered through the curtains, the grip seemed to fade, leaving behind a residue of dread. The day's bright start did little to lift the weight of the previous night's events. I knew that the house, and the sensations I felt within it, had left a mark on me. It wasn't just a fleeting scare. It was a night that had altered my perception of the familiar. The incident remained unexplained, a haunting reminder of the unknown. I had experienced something that defied logic and left me with a lingering sense of unease. Whether it was a figment of my imagination or a true encounter with the inexplicable, the night would forever be etched in my memory as a chilling chapter of true ghost horror. What if I told you that a simple, silly putty ball could trigger one of the most unsettling experiences of your life? In this video, you'll discover the true story behind a seemingly ordinary night that turned into a terrifying encounter with something inexplicable. Don't miss out on the spine-chilling details that will keep you questioning reality and the true nature of what happened that night. I was in 5th grade, sprawled out on the floor of my room with a mound of silly putty. The room was dim, lit only by the soft glow of a lamp on my desk. I was molding the putty into shapes, completely absorbed in my little world. The rain was tapping lightly against the window, creating a soothing backdrop of rain sounds that made the evening feel oddly peaceful. I had molded the putty into a perfect ball and placed it carefully on the floor behind me. Not thinking much of it, my mom called from downstairs, announcing that dinner was ready. As I got up to head downstairs, a sudden jarring sensation hit me in the back of my head. It felt like a sharp jab, as if someone had flicked me hard. I turned around, half expecting to see a playful sibling or a stray toy that had somehow made its way into my room, but there was nothing. The silly putty ball was gone. I froze for a moment, confusion and fear creeping in. My eyes scanned the room until they landed on the windowsill. There, the silly putty ball was bouncing up and down as if it were alive. It wasn't just rolling. It was bouncing with an almost rhythmic precision. I watched in disbelief as it continued its bizarre dance. My heart pounded in my chest, and my mind raced to make sense of the situation. How could a simple ball of silly putty move on its own? I stood there, paralyzed with fear, my eyes glued to the putty. My room felt colder, and the once comforting sound of rain now seemed ominous. I grabbed the ball, not bothering to mold it back into shape. I was too shaken to care about anything other than getting out of there. I bolted downstairs, almost tripping over my own feet in my haste. My mom was waiting in the kitchen, her face full of concern as I burst through the door, breathless and frantic. "Mom, you won't believe what just happened. The silly putty." I stammered, struggling to find the right words. My hands were shaking, and the ball of putty felt like a heavy weight in my palm. My mom looked at me with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. "What about the silly putty?" she asked, clearly trying to keep her tone light. Though her concern was evident, I could tell she was struggling to understand the panic in my voice. I was sure I must have looked like a mess, eyes wide and hands trembling. "I was just playing with it," I explained, trying to catch my breath. I put it on the floor, and when I turned around, it was bouncing on the windowsill all by itself. My words tumbled out in a rush, barely coherent. I knew how ridiculous it sounded, but it was the truth. The ball had moved on its own, and it wasn't just a trick of light or a draft. My mom, sensing my distress, tried to comfort me. She reached out and took the ball from my hand, inspecting it closely. "Are you sure you didn't just knock it or something?" she asked gently. Her voice was soothing, but I could see the doubt in her eyes. I could hardly blame her. It was a strange story even to me. "No, Mom, I swear," I said, trying to remain calm. I was sitting right there, and it just started bouncing. I felt a wave of frustration mixed with fear. The logical part of me was fighting against the bizarre experience, trying to rationalize it away. But the reality of what I had seen was too unsettling to ignore. She sighed, giving me a reassuring smile. "All right, why don't you sit down and tell me what happened while we eat? Maybe you'll feel better after a bit of food." Her tone was soothing, and I nodded. still clutching the silly putty ball like a talisman. As we sat down at the dinner table, I tried to shake off the unsettling feeling, but the memory of the bouncing putty lingered in my mind. The rain continued its steady rhythm outside, and I could hear the occasional rumble of thunder in the distance. The soothing sounds did little to calm the knot of anxiety in my stomach. I found myself staring out the window, half expecting to see something unusual in the downpour. The night felt heavier, as if it was hiding something just beyond my sight. Dinner was a blur. I tried to focus on the conversation, but my thoughts kept drifting back to that strange event. My mom was chatting about her day, making light-hearted jokes, but I could barely respond. The silly putty ball sat on the table in front of me, a constant reminder of what had just happened. After dinner, I found myself wandering back to my room, determined to figure out what might have caused the silly putty to act so oddly. The rain outside had intensified, and the wind howled through the trees, creating an eerie backdrop that seemed to amplify my unease. I reached for the putty, which was now on my desk, and placed it gently back on the floor where it had been before. I sat down on my bed, my eyes fixed on the silly putty. Nothing happened. The ball remained motionless, as if it were just a regular toy. I tried to convince myself that it had all been a trick of the light or a draft from the window, but the memory of its bouncing was too vivid to ignore. I felt a chill run down my spine as I remembered how the ball had seemed to have a mind of its own. As I stared at the putty, my thoughts were interrupted by a sudden noise from the window. The blinds were fluttering slightly, and I could see the rain slashing against the glass. My heart skipped a beat, and I braced myself for another unexpected event. I approached the window, peering out into the storm, but saw nothing out of the ordinary. The world outside was just a blur of rain and darkness. I turned back to my room, trying to shake off the feeling of dread. I considered going downstairs to tell my mom about the noise, but I didn't want to sound like I was overreacting. Instead, I decided to stay in my room, hoping that if I just ignored the weirdness, it would go away. I settled into bed, trying to calm my racing thoughts, but sleep felt elusive. As I lay there, the rain continued its steady beat, and the wind seemed to whisper secrets through the cracks in the walls. The silence in my room grew heavier, and every creak of the house made me jump. The scary stories I had heard before seemed to come alive in my mind, blending with the events of the evening. Despite my attempts to push them away, I couldn't shake the unsettling feeling that something wasn't quite right. The night dragged on, and I lay in bed wide awake, my mind replaying the events from earlier. I could hear the steady rhythm of the rain against the window and the occasional rumble of thunder, adding to the eerie atmosphere. The silly putty ball was now back in my desk drawer, and I kept glancing towards it, half expecting it to start bouncing again. Finally, exhaustion began to take its toll. I closed my eyes, trying to will myself into a state of sleep. Just as I started to drift off, a loud crash from the window jolted me awake. My heart pounded in my chest as I sat up, my eyes darting around the dark room. The noise had sounded like something heavy had hit the window, and I was filled with a mix of fear and curiosity. I hesitated for a moment, then slowly got out of bed and approached the window. The storm outside had worsened, and the wind was howling with a force that seemed almost unnatural. I peered through the window but saw nothing unusual, just the driving rain and the dark outline of trees swaying violently in the wind. When I turned back to my room, I noticed something peculiar. The silly putty ball was no longer in the desk drawer. It was now sitting on the floor, in the exact spot where it had bounced earlier. I picked it up, feeling a strange sense of relief mixed with lingering anxiety. It was as if the ball's return to its original place was a sign that the strange occurrences were over. I went back to bed, holding the silly putty tightly. As I lay there, I replayed the events of the night in my mind, trying to make sense of them. The scary tales I'd read suddenly seemed less like fiction, and more like a reflection of the eerie experience I'd just had. I reminded myself that it was just a toy, and there had to be a logical explanation, even if I couldn't figure it out. Eventually, sleep came, though it was fitful. The rain sounds outside were a constant presence, blending into the background of my dreams. By morning, the storm had passed, and the world outside was calm again. The silly putty ball remained on the floor, seemingly as innocent as ever. As I got up and went about my day, The events of the previous night felt like a distant, unsettling memory, part of the true horror stories of childhood that remain vivid even as we grow older. And so, the night ended as abruptly as it had begun, leaving me with a lingering sense of unease, but also a strange comfort that whatever had happened was now behind me. Ever wondered why the Stanley Hotel is infamous for its ghostly, childlike laughter? This video dives deep into the real experiences of guests who heard eerie sounds of children playing in the hallways at night. Learn how these unsettling occurrences connect to the hotel's haunted past, and why you need to know the truth before your next visit. Stay tuned to uncover what makes these stories so spine-chilling. The Stanley Hotel in Estes Park, Colorado was a grand place, standing tall amidst the misty pines and casting an imposing shadow over the landscape. ID checked in just before dusk, eager to experience the renowned atmosphere of the hotel that had inspired Stephen King's The Shining. The lobby was decorated in vintage elegance, the kind that seemed to whisper secrets from every corner. That night, after a long drive and a hearty dinner, I was ready to hit the sack. Little did I know, sleep would be elusive. Around 1 a.m., I was jolted awake by the unmistakable sounds of children's laughter echoing through the hallways. At first, it was faint, like a distant party, but it quickly grew louder. The sounds of running footsteps and giggles seemed to bounce off the old walls, a cacophony of joy and mischief that was completely out of place in the dead of night. Confused and a bit annoyed, I opened my door to see what was going on. The corridor was empty, bathed in the dim glow of flickering sconces. I stepped out, my slippers making soft thuds on the carpeted floor as I peered around the corner. The hallway stretched out, eerily quiet now, as if it had never been disturbed. My heart was still racing from the sudden wake-up call, but I shrugged it off. Quick little buggers, I muttered to myself, figuring it must have been a couple of kids staying in the hotel having a late-night adventure. I returned to my room, locking the door behind me and trying to shake off the lingering sense of unease. Despite my efforts to go back to sleep, the sounds kept replaying in my mind, each giggle and thump echoing like a persistent ghost in the back of my head. The rain began to fall outside, creating a soothing backdrop of rain sounds that only seemed to amplify the silence within the hotel. I tossed and turned, the rain's rhythm doing little to calm my nerves. The next morning I joined my partner for the hotel tour, hoping to shake off the previous night's disturbance. Our guide was a local who seemed to know every creaky floorboard and hidden corner of the hotel. As we stood in front of our room, the guide started to recount tales of the hotel's haunted past. My ears perked up when she mentioned the ghosts of young girls who were said to run up and down the very hallway I had heard the laughter in. The children's voices, she said, are a common occurrence here. The guide's words echoed in my mind as we continued the tour. Each step felt heavier, the stories about the hotel's haunted reputation suddenly feeling more real. I tried to focus on the guide's explanations of the hotel's history, but the previous night's sounds seemed to reverberate in my thoughts. The guide was clearly passionate about the history and the supernatural tales surrounding the Stanley, and she spoke with an almost reverent tone about the so-called spirits. As we walked through the grand hallways, the guide pointed out various historical features of the hotel, from its old-fashioned furnishings to its architectural quirks. She wove in anecdotes about the guests who had stayed here, their experiences often recounted as part of the hotel's lore. I noticed the guide paused, giving our room a knowing look. Many guests have reported hearing the sounds of children, she said, her voice lowering slightly, their laughter and footsteps echoing through these very halls. My partner gave me a sideways glance, sensing the tension in my shoulders. I shrugged it off, trying to act nonchalant, despite the shiver that ran down my spine. The guide continued, describing how some believed the children's spirits were simply reliving their days at the hotel, their presence a nostalgic echo of a time long past. It's as if they're stuck in a loop, she said, their joy forever repeating in these halls. We were led to the ballroom, where the guide pointed out old photographs and elaborate chandeliers. The room was beautifully preserved, yet it felt somewhat oppressive, as if the weight of countless stories hung in the air. I glanced at the other tour members, all of whom seemed absorbed in the guide's tales. My mind kept wandering back to the previous night, the sounds now feeling more like an unsettling presence than a mere coincidence. As the tour concluded, I felt a mix of relief and unease. The guide's stories had added a layer of eerie credibility to my own experience, turning what was once a harmless disturbance into something more sinister. We headed back to our room, the atmosphere of the hotel now feeling charged with the stories of its haunted past. Returning to our room, the atmosphere felt heavier, almost palpable. The daylight filtering through the windows did little to dispel the feeling of unease. I glanced at the clock. It was still early, and the echoes of last night seemed to linger, casting a shadow over the rest of the day. My partner and I decided to explore the hotel grounds, hoping a change of scenery might clear our heads. The Stanley Hotel's grounds were expansive, with lush gardens and winding paths that seemed to stretch endlessly. We wandered through them, the sound of our footsteps muffled by the thick carpet of fallen leaves. The rain had stopped, leaving the air fresh and cool. Despite the beauty of the surroundings, a sense of dread hung over me, a lingering reminder of the previous night's eerie occurrences. As we walked, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, though I knew it was likely just my nerves getting the better of me. We explored the nearby areas, the grandness of the hotel's architecture and the serene landscape providing a stark contrast to the unsettling experiences of the night before. Every creak of the old building seemed to echo in my mind, a reminder of the ghostly stories told by the guide. By late afternoon, we returned to our room to rest before dinner. As I sat on the edge of the bed, I noticed a strange draft in the room. Though the windows were closed tight, the rain had started up again, its rhythmic patter against the window pane, adding to the sense of melancholy. I tried to push the unsettling thoughts away, focusing on the calming sound of the rain, a sleep aid for my restless mind. Dinner was a pleasant distraction, but as nightfall approached, I couldn't help but feel a sense of foreboding. The hotel, once charming, now seemed to hold an oppressive weight. I hoped the night would pass without incident, but as we headed back to our room, I couldn't ignore the increasing tension that had settled over me. The echoes of laughter from the previous night seemed to be waiting for us, an unspoken promise of a repeat performance. That night I was determined to confront my fears head on. We returned to our room, and as I settled into bed, I reminded myself that the eerie sounds I had heard the previous night were likely just a figment of my imagination exacerbated by the hotel's spooky reputation. Yet, despite my rational attempts to dismiss it, a knot of anxiety twisted in my stomach. The clock struck 1 a.m., and there was again the unmistakable sound of children laughing and running in the hallway. It started softly, just like before, but quickly escalated into a full-fledged chorus of giggles and hurried footsteps. My heart pounded as I lay still in bed, the familiar sounds now tinged with a deeper sense of dread. I glanced at my partner, who was still soundly asleep, seemingly unaffected. I got up cautiously and opened the door, peering into the dimly lit hallway. The laughter seemed louder now, almost as if it was coming from right outside our room. I stepped into the corridor, but once again, it was empty. The silence that followed was heavy. I stood there, feeling a chill as the rain outside pattered softly against the window, its soothing sound now a stark contrast to the unsettling noises of the night. The experience was unsettling enough to make me question my own sanity. Was it all in my head, or was there something truly inexplicable happening? I couldn't shake the feeling that the hotel's stories were more than mere folklore. The sounds of the children's laughter seemed to mock my attempts at rationalizing the experience. I returned to my room, locking the door behind me, and tried to get back to sleep, though every creak of the old building now felt like an ominous reminder of the night's events. Morning came with a sense of relief, but also a lingering unease. As we packed up to leave, the hotel's grandeur felt distant, overshadowed by the eerie echoes of the night. The guide's stories had turned a simple night in a historic hotel into a chilling experience, one that would linger in my memory long after we left. The Stanley Hotel had lived up to its reputation, not with visible ghosts or supernatural confrontations, but with the unsettling whispers of its past, a true horror story that unfolded in the dead of night. Ever wondered what it feels like to be alone in a locked pool building while hearing mysterious noises? It'll reveal the spine-chilling details of my night shift including the strange sounds that left me questioning my sanity. Watch until the end to find out what I discovered, and why it might keep you up at night too. I worked the night shift at the local public pool, a job I'd taken on to pay the bills and keep myself busy. It was a quiet, solitary gig, cleaning the building and the pool after hours. The building was my domain from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., and by 2 a.m., I was deep in the routine of mopping the changing rooms. The sound of rain against the windows was almost soothing, a backdrop to my monotonous task. The pool had been closed for 4 hours, and there hadn't been a soul around since the last patron left. As I was scrubbing away, the sound hit me light, high-pitched laughter, like the kind you'd hear from a child playing. It was followed by the unmistakable pitter-patter of bare feet racing across the pool deck. I froze, mop mid-stroke, my heart thudding against my ribcage. My immediate reaction was to check the area. I rushed out of the changing rooms and onto the pool deck, scanning every corner, every shadow. The lights were dimmed, casting eerie reflections in the water, but there was nothing. The pool deck was empty, save for the vacant lounge chairs and floating debris. I walked across the surface, my footsteps echoing in the silence. There were no wet footprints on the deck, no sign of recent activity. I checked the doors. They were locked, as they should be. The sound I'd heard was clear, unmistakable, but now it was as if it had never happened. I went back inside to the security monitors, my nerves on edge. The cameras showed nothing out of the ordinary, just the empty pool and the occasional flicker of light. I double-checked the doors, the locks, everything. The building was secure, and I was alone. Yet the sound of that child's laughter was still echoing in my mind. It was unsettling, an eerie reminder that even in the most mundane of places, something inexplicable could happen. The rain continued its steady rhythm outside, a backdrop to the growing unease within. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, though I knew it was just my mind playing tricks. The laughter had stopped, but the echoes remained. The solitude of the night shift, coupled with the strange noise, made me question my own senses. Was it a prank? A trick of the acoustics? Or was it something more unsettling? As the minutes dragged on, I tried to focus on finishing my tasks. I returned to the changing rooms, hoping that throwing myself back into the routine would calm my nerves. The sound of the rain against the windows was oddly comforting now, a rhythmic reminder of the outside world. I kept replaying the laughter in my mind, trying to rationalize it. Maybe it was just a figment of my imagination, a byproduct of exhaustion or stress, but the unsettling feeling wouldn't leave me. I kept checking my watch, each tick echoing louder in the silence. I couldn't ignore the fact that the pool deck was not only empty, but eerily still. I decided to do another sweep, this time more thorough. I went back out to the deck, this time examining the shadows and corners more closely. The water was calm, reflecting the dim lights like a dark mirror. It was as if the entire area was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. As I walked along the edge, the sound of my footsteps mingled with the distant patter of rain. The silence was almost too perfect, a sharp contrast to the sudden burst of noise I had heard earlier. I reached the pool's edge and leaned over, peering into the water. The surface was smooth and undisturbed, save for a few floating leaves. The stillness of the water felt almost oppressive, adding to the growing tension in the room. I continued my inspection, moving around the pool deck and checking the surrounding areas. Everything seemed in order, yet the sense of unease persisted. I decided to return to the changing rooms to finish up and prepare to leave. The mundane tasks seemed oddly comforting in their routine, a stark contrast to the unsettling incident. I tried to convince myself that the laughter was just a trick of the mind, a result of spending too many nights alone in the quiet building. Just as I was about to complete my final check, I heard it again, the same high-pitched laughter, faint but unmistakable. It came from somewhere near the pool, but this time it was softer, almost as if it was fading away. I froze, my heart racing once more. I glanced around, but the pool deck was still deserted. The eerie sound had returned, and with it, the overwhelming sense that something was amiss. By now, my nerves were frayed. The constant noise of the rain was no longer soothing, but seemed to heighten my sense of isolation. I tried to keep calm, focusing on finishing my tasks and leaving the building as soon as possible. I went back to the security monitors, checking them for any sign of movement. The cameras still showed an empty pool and an empty deck. Everything looked the same as before, but the laughter, that haunting sound, was still playing in my head. I decided to check the pool deck one more time, hoping that seeing the space with my own eyes would dispel the lingering unease. As I walked through the area, I noticed something odd. The door to the maintenance room, usually locked, was slightly ajar. My pulse quickened. I had locked it myself earlier in the night. I pushed the door open cautiously, the creak of the hinges breaking the oppressive silence. Inside, the room was dark and cluttered with cleaning supplies and equipment. The dim light from the hallway barely illuminated the space. I scanned the room, half expecting to find a hidden child or some prankster hiding behind the shelves. But there was no one, only the usual assortment of mops, buckets, and cleaning solutions. I shut the door and locked it securely, trying to shake off the strange feeling that someone or something might have been there. As I returned to the pool deck, I saw something else that made my skin crawl. There was a set of wet footprints on the floor, leading from the edge of the pool toward the door to the changing rooms. My breath caught in my throat. I knew for a fact that no one had been in the pool area since it closed. I had checked every inch of the building, and yet these footprints appeared out of nowhere. I followed them, each step echoing ominously in the empty space. The footprints led me back to the changing rooms. I bent down to examine them closely, noting that they seemed to be from small, bare feet. The wetness of the prints was inexplicable. The pool was closed, and the deck had been dry before. I retraced my steps, trying to find any logical explanation. The more I investigated, the more it became clear that something was off. The logical explanations seemed to slip through my fingers, replaced by a gnawing sense of dread. By now, my hands were trembling as I moved through the building. The wet footprints and the haunting laughter had pushed me to the edge. I knew I had to finish my shift, but the feeling of being utterly alone had turned into something more menacing. Every shadow seemed to shift, every sound amplified in my heightened state of anxiety. I wanted to leave, but I had to make sure the pool area was secure. I returned to the security monitors, scrutinizing every corner of the screen. There was still nothing unusual, just the empty pool and the stillness of the night. I decided to make one last check of the pool deck and the changing rooms. As I walked back through the area, I noticed that the rain had started to pick up, its sound now a steady drumbeat on the roof. It only added to the eerie atmosphere. In the changing rooms, I took extra care to ensure everything was in place. The lockers were shut, the floors were mopped, and the doors were locked. Yet, the feeling of being watched grew stronger. I tried to ignore it, focusing on the tasks at hand. I finished up and made my way back to the pool deck for a final sweep, my nerves on edge with every step. As I approached the pool, the sound of the rain outside became a backdrop to an unexpected noise, a faint, rhythmic tapping. It came from the pool itself, like fingers drumming against the surface. I turned my gaze to the water, but there was nothing unusual. The surface was as still as ever. The tapping continued, growing more distinct. I stood there, paralyzed, trying to pinpoint the source of the sound. Finally, I took a deep breath and decided it was time to leave. I locked up the pool area, double-checking the doors and making sure everything was secure. The rain outside seemed to wash away some of the tension as I made my way to the exit. As I walked out, I glanced back at the building, a shiver running down my spine. The night had been unsettling, but it was over. I left the pool behind, trying to shake off the eerie feeling that had lingered throughout my shift, and as I stepped into the rain, I couldn't help but wonder if the sounds I had heard were just figments of my imagination, or if there was something more to the story. The night had been a strange one, filled with echoes of laughter and the unsettling silence of an empty building. Whatever the truth was, I knew one thing for certain. That night would stay with me for a long time. What if I told you a single night could transform your belief in the supernatural forever? In this video, you'll uncover the spine-chilling events of a seemingly ordinary evening that turned into a night of true horror. Discover why a strange incident involving a heavy angel statue led to a shocking revelation about unseen forces. Stick around to find out the real reason behind these eerie occurrences, and why this story might make you rethink everything you thought you knew about the supernatural. The living room was quiet that night, bathed in the soft glow of the lamp in the corner. The old angel statue stood like a sentinel on the shelf next to my girlfriend's grandfather's ashes, a fixture in their home for as long as I could remember. It was one of those heavy, imposing statues that seemed almost too solid to move. We were lounging on the couch, enjoying a rare quiet weekend together. The rain sounds pattered gently against the windows, creating a soothing backdrop to our relaxed mood. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw something that made me freeze. The angel statue, which had been perched securely on the wall-mounted shelf, suddenly flew off with a jarring thud. It wasn't a gradual fall or a simple tip. It was as if an unseen force had hurled it through the air. My heart raced as the statue landed with a heavy crash on the floor. I glanced over at my girlfriend, and the look on her face mirrored my own shock. As I tried to make sense of what I had just seen, I noticed something else. An unsettling deep grunt had accompanied the statue's flight. It was a sound so out of place in that calm, rainy evening that it felt like it had come from somewhere beyond normal. "Did you hear that grunt?" I finally asked, my voice trembling slightly. She nodded, her eyes wide with the same disbelief I felt. We both stared at the statue, now lying on the floor. The rain sounds outside seemed to grow louder, amplifying the eerie silence that followed. I didn't know what to make of it. We didn't want to jump to conclusions, but something felt off. We decided to keep it to ourselves for the moment, not wanting to alarm anyone unnecessarily. Later at dinner, we mentioned the incident to her parents, carefully avoiding any details about what we had been doing on the couch. Her younger sister suddenly burst into tears. Through her sobs, she revealed that she had seen a dark figure at the foot of her bed over the past few nights, but had kept it to herself out of fear of being thought crazy. That revelation made everything more unsettling. It was then that I realized this wasn't just a strange coincidence. It was part of something much more chilling. The evening had taken a turn for the bizarre. After dinner, the mood in the house was tense. Megan's younger sister had retreated to her room, her earlier tears giving way to a silent fear that lingered in the air. The rain continued its steady rhythm against the windows, almost as if it was trying to drown out the uneasy atmosphere. I found myself wandering the living room, unable to shake the image of the angel statue flying off the shelf. It was as if the event had left a void in the room, one that seemed to pulse with a strange energy. Megan and I tried to carry on with our evening, but every creak and groan of the house felt amplified, as if the building itself was reacting to the night's events. We moved to the couch, trying to find some comfort in each other's company. As we talked, I couldn't help but replay the incident in my mind. The grunt, the sudden movement, it all seemed to defy reason. Megan tried to comfort her sister, but the girl was inconsolable, her fear palpable. The house felt different, as though it was holding its breath, waiting for the next strange occurrence. Around midnight, I decided to check on Megan's sister. I approached her door quietly, not wanting to disturb her more than necessary. The house was eerily silent, save for the occasional sound of the rain. I knocked gently, and when she didn't answer, I slowly opened the door. The room was dark, lit only by the dim light from the street outside. I could barely make out her figure huddled under the covers. I hesitated for a moment, then stepped inside. "Hey, it's me. Just wanted to see if you're okay." She looked up, her eyes red and swollen. She nodded but didn't say anything. As I left her room, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us, even though I knew it was just my mind playing tricks. The night stretched on, each tick of the clock feeling like an eternity. The night seemed to drag on, each passing hour thickening the already heavy atmosphere. I lay awake on the couch, unable to shake the uneasy feeling that had settled over the house. The rain outside had picked up, now pounding against the windows with a relentless rhythm. It was the kind of rain that seemed to merge with the sound of the house, making everything feel more intense and surreal. Megan had fallen asleep beside me, but I couldn't manage to rest. Every creak and groan of the house felt magnified. I could still hear the deep grunt from earlier, echoing in my mind. It was as if the house itself was trying to convey some kind of message, though I couldn't decipher what it might be. The rain sounds became almost deafening, mixing with the house noises to create an unnerving symphony. Around 2 a.m., I decided to get up and check on Megan's sister again. I moved quietly through the darkened hallways, each step amplified in the silent house. Her door was slightly ajar, and I pushed it open slowly, peeking inside. The room was dimly lit by the streetlight outside, casting long shadows on the walls. Her breathing was steady, but I felt an uneasy chill as I looked around. As I turned to leave, I saw something that made my blood run cold. In the corner of the room where the shadows were deepest, there seemed to be a dark shape that wasn't quite right. It wasn't a figure, but rather an absence of light, a void that seemed to absorb the little illumination that was present. I rubbed my eyes, thinking it was just a trick of the light, but when I looked again, it was still there. I backed out of the room slowly, trying not to disturb her. The dark presence seemed to follow me, lingering just beyond the edges of my vision. I hurried back to the living room, my heart pounding in my chest. It was clear now that something strange was happening, something beyond our understanding. I knew we needed to face whatever it was, but the fear was overwhelming. The house felt like it was closing in. The rain outside now, a constant reminder of the night's unsettling events. The clock had moved past 3 a.m., and the house felt like it was wrapped in a suffocating silence. The rain continued to batter the windows, its relentless sound now a backdrop to the eerie stillness inside. I lay awake on the couch, every fiber of my being on high alert. The unsettling events of the night had transformed the house into something unrecognizable. Unable to sleep, I decided to investigate the living room once more. The angel statue was still where it had fallen, a grim reminder of the night's disturbances. I picked it up carefully, noting the weight of it in my hands. It was hard to believe that something so heavy could have been moved so easily. I placed it back on the shelf, trying to reassure myself that it was secure. As I returned to the couch, I noticed Megan stirring. She looked at me with tired eyes, a mixture of concern and curiosity. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. I nodded, though my mind was racing. I wanted to tell her about the dark shape I had seen in her sister's room, but I didn't want to add to her anxiety. Instead, I simply said, "Just trying to figure out what's going on." Suddenly, a loud bang echoed through the house. It came from Megan's sister's room. We both jumped, and I could see the fear in Megan's eyes. We rushed down the hallway, our footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. When we reached her sister's door, it was slightly ajar. We pushed it open, but the room was empty. The only sound was the rain drumming against the windows. I went to check on her sister again, but she was fast asleep, oblivious to the commotion. The room was unchanged, except for a lingering sense of unease. We returned to the living room, where the weight of the night seemed to press down on us. As the rain continued to fall and the house settled into an uneasy quiet, I realized that the night had revealed something profound. The house, once a place of comfort, had become a vessel for something inexplicable, leaving us all with a newfound belief in the unseen. The rain sounds outside gradually softened, as if acknowledging the end of a long, tense night. We were left to process the night's events, with the once familiar home now holding a chilling memory that would linger for years to come. What if I told you that a house could drive its residents to the brink with just strange noises and creepy smells? Discover the terrifying true stories from a haunted college house, including flickering lights and items disappearing into the basement. Don't miss out on how these phenomena might be linked to an old, mysterious perfume. Find out why this could be the scariest sleep horror you've ever seen. I remember that weekend clearly. It was just me and my roommate left in that old, creaky house, with the others having moved out due to the strange happenings. It was late at night when I first noticed the door slamming. I'd been asleep for a few hours when the noise jolted me awake. It was a rhythmic, relentless banging coming from my roommate's room. I yelled, hoping to wake him up and stop the racket, but as soon as I did, the slamming stopped abruptly. I lay there in bed, listening to the unsettling silence. Then, I noticed something even more bizarre. The hippie beads hanging outside my door began to sway. It was like they were being pushed back and forth violently, though there was no breeze or draft to explain it. I sat up, my heart racing, and stared at those beads swaying furiously against the door frame. It lasted for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only half an hour. Fear crept in as I debated whether to jump out of the window or just curl up and stay in bed. I could hardly think straight, my mind racing through every horror story I'd ever heard. All I wanted was for it to stop, for that relentless swaying to end so I could feel safe again. Eventually the movement ceased, and I clung to my bed, wrapped tightly in my blankets. listening to the rain sounds outside as if they were some kind of comforting lullaby. The next morning, the house was still and eerily calm. I tried to rationalize what had happened, but the beads swaying and the door slamming were too vivid in my mind. I had hoped that maybe it was just my imagination, but I knew deep down that something was definitely wrong. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of a long night filled with more chilling experiences. The atmosphere in the house had already started to feel heavy, even though it was just the start of the day. The old walls seemed to hold on to every noise, every whisper, and every creak. I was about to discover just how unsettling the rest of the night would become. I was jolted awake again at 3 a.m. this time by the loud, unmistakable sound of Nintendo music blaring from the back porch. My first thought was that a drunk kid had broken into the house and started playing games, but it was so loud it felt like the game was right inside my room. I grabbed a bat, my nerves on edge, and cautiously made my way toward the back of the house. As I approached the back door, the music grew louder and more distorted, pounding in my ears. My pulse raced with every step, my mind replaying all the horror stories I'd ever heard about haunted houses and strange noises. I hesitated for a moment before flinging open the door, expecting to confront some unruly trespasser or malfunctioning speaker. To my surprise, the back porch was completely silent. The music had stopped the moment I opened the door, leaving an eerie quiet in its place. I stood there in the dark, bat in hand, trying to convince myself it was just a figment of my imagination or maybe an odd electrical glitch. But the silence was deafening, and the intensity of the previous noise made it all the more unnerving. I scanned the porch for any sign of disturbance but found nothing. No one was there, and no evidence of tampering with the Nintendo or any other device. I slowly retreated back into the house, the silence now feeling oppressive and unsettling. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, that the house was holding its breath, waiting for the next strange occurrence. The rest of the night passed in a haze of tension and unease. I lay awake, listening for any hint of the Nintendo music returning or any other signs that the house was alive with its own eerie rhythms. The rain sounds outside provided little comfort, blending with my racing thoughts and the growing realization that the house had secrets I couldn't easily explain. The next day, I decided to have a few friends over, hoping their presence might bring some normalcy to the house. I told them about the strange occurrences, and of course they laughed it off as a bunch of spooky stories. Determined to prove that the house was indeed haunted, I challenged whatever was causing the disturbances to make itself known. It wasn't long before my challenge was answered in the most dramatic way possible. As we all sat in the living room, chatting and laughing, the lights began to flicker wildly. At first, it was subtle, just a slight stutter in the illumination, but within moments, the flickering intensified, turning into a rapid strobe effect. It was broad daylight outside, so there was no reason for the lights to behave this way. My friends fell silent, their eyes widening as they watched the bizarre spectacle unfold. For a solid minute, the lights flashed on and off, plunging the room into unsettling shadows and then bright bursts of light. It was a sight straight out of a true ghost horror story, with each flicker casting eerie patterns on the walls. My friends, who had previously dismissed my claims, were now visibly shaken, their skepticism giving way to apprehension. When the lights finally stabilized, a heavy silence settled over the room. My friends exchanged nervous glances, clearly unnerved by what they had witnessed. It was as if the house had just put on a show, demonstrating its eerie power and confirming the ghostly presence I had been talking about. The flickering lights had provided undeniable proof of the supernatural, leaving everyone in a state of uncomfortable disbelief. Later that night, I couldn't help but notice the strong, flowery scent of old lady perfume lingering in the house, adding to the already tense atmosphere. This was a scent I had grown accustomed to, always accompanying the strange occurrences. It seemed like the house itself was intent on making sure we never forgot the strange events that unfolded within its walls. As the night wore on, the house seemed to grow more restless. My roommate and I had always tried to ignore the strange occurrences, but that night everything felt different, more intense. I decided to stay up, determined to confront whatever was causing the disturbances. I knew the house had a door built into the floor that led to the basement, but we always kept it covered with a rug, partly out of sight and mind. Earlier in the day, I had noticed that some of our belongings had gone missing, only to reappear in the basement. This had happened so many times that Wed started to believe it was just a quirk of the house. Now, with everything that had been happening, it felt like more than just coincidence. I decided to investigate, feeling a mix of dread and determination. The old coal chute in the basement had always been a source of unease for me. It was a remnant from when the house was heated by coal, and it had a way of making everything feel more sinister. I went to the basement, the strong, flowery perfume filling the air once again, amplifying the already eerie atmosphere. I could hear faint thumps coming from above, as if something or someone was moving around in the attic. I tried to ignore the thumps as I rummaged through the basement. I wasn't expecting to find anything, but then I saw a pile of items that had gone missing, things we had long forgotten about. The basement felt colder than usual, and the shadows seemed to move on their own. I quickly grabbed the items, feeling like I was being watched, though I knew it was just the anxiety and fear playing tricks on me. Returning upstairs, I found my roommate sitting in the dark, looking pale and shaken. He had experienced something unsettling of his own. While playing video games late at night, he had seen a misty figure moving from the kitchen to the bathroom. The bathroom had a trapdoor leading to the attic, and we'd always suspected that this was where the ghost liked to linger. We both knew that the house had one more secret to reveal, but we also knew we had reached the limit of what we could handle. The rest of the night was filled with the unsettling noises of the house, the thumps from the attic, the flickering lights, and the occasional scent of perfume. As dawn approached, I found myself on the front porch, waiting for the sun to rise, my mind racing through the night's events. The house had shown us its true nature, leaving us with a chilling reminder that it was far from empty, and perhaps it never would be. If you enjoyed the video you just watched, you won't want to miss this next one. Click now and I'll see you there.